Guys, what's up? It's Neonta Williams with the Advocates Chair. Da-da-da-da-da-da. You see it right here. We are so excited to be here for this episode of the Advocates Chair. As you guys know, we are using this platform as an opportunity to be a vehicle to disseminate information across the world for families who may be interested in what's happening in educational spaces, and particularly as educational advocates. And so right here in Alabama, Black Alabamians for Education has been an advocate for traditional public, private, charter, virtual home, blended school options. And today, not just today, but today we're talking about a new model that's here in the state, and it's called micro schools. And so really excited to invite our guest on, Mr. Ryan Delk.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. Really appreciate it. With Primer, who is going to talk to us a little bit about micro schools. But Ryan, before we get into like the whole who's Primer, what are micro schools, who is Ryan?
So this whole thing actually started because my mom, about 28 years ago, started one of the first micro schools in Florida. So she started this little kind of a glorified co-op. We were zoned for an elementary school that was, she wasn't excited about us going to. It was back when they did letter grades, and it was an F-rated elementary school. Mm. And she just decided she didn't want her kids to go there. And so she took matters into her own hands. She was a public school teacher, and figured out how to put together this group of families that were kind of all aligned and wanted their kids to have a better education, but didn't have the money for their kids to go to private school. We couldn't move. We didn't have the money to move to a better school district. And so she started this and totally changed my life and my friends' lives, my siblings' lives. And so when my wife and I started having kids and we thought about the education that we wanted our kids to have, I wanted them to have something like that. And then I realized that it basically didn't exist. So I started talking to teachers, and they all, almost unanimously, they said, I would love to start something like that in my community, but I have no idea how to do it. I don't know how to get a facility. I don't know how to do the curriculum. It's a ton of work. It's a lot of risk. And Primer at its simplest form is really about taking that idea of what my mom, started 28 years ago, and helping bring it to, hopefully hundreds of thousands and then millions of kids around the U.S.
Yeah, no, so what I heard was mom, right, parent, advocate, traditional public school educator. And what I'm trying to do is dispel some of these myths that people have around, quality school choice options. And then, and not just quality school choice options, but the idea that options exist.
Yeah.
And then you as a recipient, right, as a student. So, how did your experience in sort of that homeschool model change your life or expose you to things that you felt like? Did you feel like you missed anything from being in a larger school environment versus, and this is you personally, not what our students are getting today. We're going to get to that. But you personally, do you feel like you missed anything?
I'm 100% confident I would not be sitting here today or anywhere close to it if it wasn't for the sacrifices that my parents made. This was such early days in this whole kind of education, innovation, school choice movement that my mom had to just figure all this out from scratch on her own. Like there was no playbook for her to run. Yeah. And so it was this kind of Herculean effort that they put in. But I think like most kids, I didn't really appreciate it for the first few years. I just thought this is what school's like. Like, this is awesome.
Right.
This is great. And then I remember as I got into middle school and high school and started, meeting friends that went to other kinds of schools, I realized, wait a second, my life is totally different than yours, because my parents were very oriented around, they sort of said, hey, we're going to have a really rigorous academic, kind of environment and culture. Here's exactly what you need to learn. But once you go knock all that stuff out, you can spend time starting companies, working on projects, things that you want to work on. And they gave us a lot of freedom to go pursue that. And so I have all these memories growing up of starting little business ideas and trying to, figure out how to make it work. And my parents just gave us tons and tons of leeway. So by the time I got to even high school, I had all these reps on things that my peers had only really done in these kind of like manufactured school project environments but I had done in the real world. And I think that gave me a huge leg up going into high school and then college. So I definitely think I didn't miss it. I didn't miss anything, but it gave me, I feel like, a huge advantage, going into high school and college and then beyond. And it's all, nothing that I did, but just that my parents, were willing to advocate for me and create this better path.
Yeah, I love it. Of course, like we have 7 core values here in the organization. Obviously, we're Black Alabamians for Education, and we are I'm a Black woman. So we're advocating for Black children. And so we really, because when we look at the data, we see that overwhelmingly children of color are underperforming more than other children. And then when you look at other pieces of data, you see that those low income working class families are also underperforming. And that's when you get into other race brackets. So I brought that up because one of our core values is that we believe that Black children are inherently intelligent and talented. And so not just Black children, but all children are. And so once they're placed in that right environment where their intelligence is fostered, it's really a game changer. So in our green room, you were talking about being an athlete. So, you know, were there any skills that you gained personally from this early on type of learning environment that allows you to be successful even in a world of athleticism?
I think my parents, the big thing that they created an environment. We have this motto at Primer. It's really kind of the thing that encompasses everything that we do. We talk about taking kids seriously. And so it's this idea of kids should have agency in their experience of education. It shouldn't be something that happens to them. It should be something they're an active participant in. And that was really, I think, pretty foundational for everything they set us up to do, whether it was participating in athletics or academics or extracurriculars. There was this sense of they trusted us as humans to be responsible, to decide how we wanted to spend our time. And they pushed us and they allowed us to make mistakes and try things out that we were bad at. And they didn't try to create this kind of like super soft environment where, we couldn't fail. They were willing to let us put ourselves out there. And I think that was probably the thing that was most impactful for me early on, was they didn't try to protect us too much from the world, and they kind of let us. There was lots of real talk and lots of, here's exactly where you're at academically. You're ahead in this. You're behind in that. You better catch up. And I think that kind of it fostered, I think, a sense of respect between us. That was very powerful. And it is a lot of now at Primer, how we think about, communicating with kids is with this sense of respect and agency, that they have the capacity to engage with these ideas, and know exactly where they're at and be motivated by catching up, or getting farther ahead. And that's very foundational for us.
Yeah, that's good. Y'all, listen, I'm sitting here with Ryan Delk of Primer, and we just got into all of his personal business. So we're going to take a break and come back, and we're going to jump right back into who is Primer and what is Primer doing in Alabama. We'll be back. All right, Neonta back with the Advocates Chair, Black Alabamians for Education, sitting here with Mr. Ryan Delk of Primer. So, Ryan, tell us a little bit about Primer. Who is Primer?
So what we do is very simple. We empower great teachers to start schools in their communities. And we believe that there's thousands of great teachers across Alabama, across the Southeast, across the US, who would love to start small schools that serve the needs of their communities. But doing that is really hard. And it's hard logistically. It's hard from a pedagogy perspective. And so what we do is we take on all that complexity for those teachers, and we make it really easy for them to stand up a school that serves the needs of their community. So we have schools across Florida, across Arizona, and now across Alabama. As of today, today's actually the first day of school.
Congratulations.
So I've been driving all across Alabama, visiting all of our new campuses. And so our model is from a student perspective, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of overarching philosophy is this idea of taking kids seriously. So we built a software platform that allows kids to see exactly how they're doing academically. So they take an intake exam. It figures out their strengths, their weaknesses, things that they're excelling at. They might be way ahead of grade level on, things that they might be behind grade level on and need some more support. And then the academic program is designed around that student's unique needs. And so they'll have a combination of in-person learning from their Primer leader, the leader of their micro school. They'll also have virtual learning experiences. So that might be a small group tutoring session if they're behind and they need additional support, or it might be an advanced class. So if they're in third grade, but they're on fifth grade math, they could be an advanced virtual math class with other students their age who are also advanced. They might use an AI tutor to get either farther ahead or to catch up in certain concepts. They might have peer learning experiences where they're working with other students. Maybe they're reading a book and discussing it in a peer only, no teacher, obviously the teacher's in the classroom, but it's a peer only experience where they're learning how to kind of use their time themselves and be responsible with their time. So we designed this academic model, where kids are able to move kind of in a very personalized way. And then parents also have total transparency into how their kids are doing. So they have a mobile app on iOS, Android, a web dashboard where they can see exactly how their kids are tracking in every subject. They can see their strengths. They can see their weaknesses. They can see precise ways that they can lean in and help their kids move faster. So there's no surprises. You're not waiting for a report card or a parent-teacher conference. So that's kind of the mornings. And then in the afternoons, we do what's called primer pursuits. And that's kind of what we're most well known for with families. And that's where kids get to go deep on real world projects that they're excited about. So that might be building robots. That might be starting a podcast, might be launching a Shopify store or an Etsy store, starting a real business with other kids. And these aren't like, fake contrived, projects. These are real world experiences that the kids can lean into. And so, if they're starting a business on Shopify, they're going to actually be, creating a little fulfillment center in the classroom and shipping out the orders and figuring out how to market their items, learning how to maintain a P&L, learning what their taxes would be. And so it's not these kind of, classic school projects where things are kind of contrived and the kids can kind of tell this isn't really real. This is just kind of a fake thing that we're kind of role playing this business. We try to make it as real as possible. And so that's how kids spend their afternoons. And the idea is that you can use technology in really thoughtful ways, not to replace teachers or to try to have kids sitting on screens all day, but to deliver this personalization to the learning experience, to empower teachers to be a lot more effective, but then still give kids that really warm in-person learning environment. And then finally, the most important thing is doing it at a price point that every family can afford. And so there's this, I think there's this really sad reality in our country, certainly in Alabama, certainly in Florida and Arizona, where most kind of working class, middle class families cannot afford the education that they dream of for their kids.
Sure.
Either because they can't afford to move to a good school district, or because they can't afford private school and the options that they have, from a public or charter perspective aren't meeting their kids' needs. And so we believe in the mission of Primer is to figure out how to take that kind of world-class education and make it accessible to every family. And so we do partnerships with different states. We do partnerships with nonprofit organizations. And then we also on our end work to get our costs as low as possible. And so we have lots of families that attend Primer for either $0 out of pocket, totally free, or, $50 or $100 a month for their kids to attend a private school that delivers great academic outcomes. And so that's kind of a core part of the model. A lot of people assume Primer is like one of these very expensive private schools, but it's not. We want Primer to be affordable, and we believe that this kind of reality that's the case for many families where they have to choose between putting themselves in a very uncomfortable financial situation or compromising on their kids' education has to end. And we want Primer to be the thing that ends that.
Wow. So you have shared a lot. And I was thinking as you're talking, I'm processing and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know we've had this conversation before, but I'm like, okay, we got to break this down, right? Like sheep food. So I want to talk about, and not necessarily in this category, but I want to talk about the educators that are actually teaching and facilitating the trainings. I want to talk about the curriculum. I know when you and I discussed this before, it was kind of like Primer has this sort of school in a box model. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then definitely want to talk about grade levels. I guess I can ask this question now. It's kindergarten through 12th grade or?
Kindergarten through 8th grade right now.
Kindergarten through 8th grade.
Yeah.
And then also I want to talk about like, how do families afford this? Because Alabama has multiple. So we now have the Choose Act. We also have the Alabama Accountability Act.
Yep.
And so I probably should go back and say, because you mentioned private schools. So Primer, or not just Primer, but micro schools are considered private
Yes.
schools.
Yep.
And so with that being understood, there are varying state requirements. So it's not a private school. It's not like your traditional public schools and or charter schools, which are also public schools,
Yep.
whereby they're held to the same specific state standards on curriculum models, teaching to certain standards or academic outcomes.
Yep.
And so, but there are standards that I'm certain that Primer has and also private schools have. But also Primer is not necessarily, while it is a private school, it may not be a religious private school. Am I correct in saying that?
Yep.
So, again, important for people to really understand what that means. But so let's start with the students, kindergarten through 8th grade.
Yep.
So if a teacher decides that they want to establish their own Primer sites or Primer school, the school automatically opens with kindergarten through 8th grade students? Or so how does that work if I have 2 first graders, 1 kindergartner and, 3 7th graders. So
Yeah.
how does that vary?
Yep. Great question.
And then, okay, I got another question too. And then the other question I want to ask that I would like for you to answer or share with us is, like, do I start this school in my home? Do I start it in a building? Like, am I in a library? Like, what does this look like for someone?
Great questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the real estate front, we have an incredible real estate team that
Okay.
actually works to secure locations for each primer. So we have what's called the Primer Fellowship, where teachers apply right around now. So typically, like between August and October, teachers will apply to launch a primer in the upcoming August. So about a year out. They'll go through a very rigorous training program, everything from the academic model to curriculum to how to use our software, to how to engage with families operationally, how do you actually run a primer. And during that process, our real estate team works with them to help secure a location in their community. And so that could be a church, it could be a community center, it could be a library, it could be an existing school. We have lots of primers that are co-located with either former school sites or current school sites. And so there's no primers that are in homes or residential facilities. These are all, what we would consider kind of proper school facilities. And so as a parent, your child is going to, a safe space, typically that's very well known in the community. So you probably have already heard of it. You know where it is. Maybe you've been there before. And then the teachers don't have to take on any of the complexity of finding real estate or, signing a lease or any of that kind of stuff. We do all that for them. And then from a grade level perspective, we aim to launch every primer with 3 primer leaders, one for K through 2, one for 3 through 5, and one for 6 through 8.
Okay.
So we believe in mixed grade level classrooms. There's a lot of research that suggests that when you have kids in a mixed age environment, it's much better for their development, much better socially, and even better academically as well. And so typically we will have K through 2 students together, 3 through 5 students together, and 6 through 8 students together. And so any given teacher is not, running a classroom with more than 2 or 3 grade levels. And then as that school grows, we'll often subdivide those further. So we have schools in Florida, for example, where there's just a kindergarten, micro school with just kindergartners, or just a 1st and 2nd grade micro school. And so you don't have a situation where a teacher has a kindergartner, a 2nd grader, and a 7th grader, all together.
Okay. That makes sense. So essentially when a primer school launches, you really launch with 3 educators.
That's the goal. Yeah.
The goal is to have 3.
So if you have siblings, you got 4 kids, you got a kindergartner, 2nd grader, 3rd grader, and 5th grader, you can drop all of them off at one location where there's 3 different micro schools there.
So why do we call this micro schools? Is it because of the number of students that's in there, or like, why are we calling this micro? And not like, you're not just calling it that, like across the country.
We call them primers. So we're like, we're just built primers, but a lot of people call us micro schools. I think part of it is it's a reaction from parents. Public schools and even private schools in many cases have grown so large, like thousands and thousands of students at a single campus. And I think there's a lot of negatives in that sort of environment for kids. And so I think the micro school movement in a lot of ways is a reaction to that, and saying, hey, we want our kids in a much smaller environment. We want them to be really known by the staff and the teachers. We want them to know other students across other grade levels. We don't want them to just feel like a number at this giant campus. And especially for, I think, elementary and middle schoolers, it's daunting to go to a school with 1,200 kids. And so I think the micro school movement was in many ways kind of born as a reaction to these really, really large schools that were growing, and parents wanting something much smaller that maybe felt like the schools of 30 or 40 years ago, across the US that their kids could go to.
Okay. So, man, this is exciting. You've given a lot of information, and I feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much more I want to ask. So when we come back, because we're going to go to another commercial break, but when we come back, I want you to tell us a little bit more about what the school day looks like for a parent, right? And also for the students, it's a drop off. Are we outside playing? Are we running around? And here's the number one question. Where's the food? Right? Is the food good? Where's it coming from? What does that look like? So, guys, the Advocates Chair, Neonta with Black Alabamians for Education. I'm here with Mr. Ryan Delk of Primer, who is Primer, but I call it micro schools because it's micro school. A little bit. All right, we'll be back. All right, guys, we're back. It's Neonta, last name Williams. You know me. I feel like Janet Jackson, just a little bit, not really. with the Advocates Chair. And as I said, I'm here with Mr. Ryan Delk. And listen, we almost got into some sauce on off camera. So we're like, hold up, save that. Let's talk about it on camera. So we're back. You gave us some really good knowledge around, your classrooms, how you are K through 8th grade. And so your model is to have 2 to 3 grade levels in each classroom, school lunches, preferably with 3 teachers with 2 to 3 grade levels in each classroom. We talked about first half of the day is around academia instruction. The second half of the day is really getting into almost like PBL, project-based learning. So students can become entrepreneurs. They can launch into some AI things and some other things that can be happening during the day. So I was getting ready to say, I really do like and have seen the success of a 2 grade level. I've seen 2 grade levels in one classroom. My church over in Fairfield, Alabama, under the leadership of Pastor David Craig, has a private school, Mount Pilgrim Christian Academy. And at times when enrollment is high, and even when it's low, the practice has been essentially, or not low, but just lower than is an average, right? So we've practiced having 2 to 3 grade levels in one classroom, and those students flourish. I remember when I once worked at the church, our children that came from the daycare, by the time they got into kindergarten, they were already writing and reading in kindergarten, and not just writing, but also writing in cursive. And so it's very powerful to be able to accelerate that kind of learning. So you and I were getting ready to talk about academics. Let's talk about the academic achievements and requirements. Well, not requirements, but like, what's the academic standards? Are we just in school having fun, a great place to drop off the kids, or what are our, what is the academia standards there?
Yeah, this is something we feel quite strongly about. And I actually think, sometimes in the, kind of school choice, education, innovation, micro school, whatever you want to call this kind of like broader movement, there's this, I think it's an unfortunate sort of aversion to talking about academic accountability. And we kind of want to be the opposite of that. And so, we do NWEA MAP tests, which we believe are kind of the gold standard for academic progress. About 12 million kids, I think, across the U.S. take that test every year. We do those 3 times a year.
Okay.
And so
you do
we do one at the start of the year, we do one at about the midpoint, and one at the end of the year.
Okay.
And so that gives us pretty rigorous two different data points. So one is if you're not familiar with the NWA map, it gives you the overall achievement of an individual child based on all the students that take the test, based on where they are from a grade level perspective. And so this kid is in the 30th percentile or 50th percentile or 80th percentile for 3rd graders. Mm-hmm. But then more importantly, it gives you their growth percentile. And that's actually what we look at more, because we can't control, if a kid comes to primer and their first year, they're in the 90th percentile for 2nd graders. That's awesome. We had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But what we can control is how fast they keep growing, and do they continue to grow and maintain or ideally move up in the percentiles.
Can I just say that I really think that I really like that, right? And so I know that a lot of districts also use MAP testing, but they may not be testing as frequently. And then what I like about it as well is that it's individualized. So it's on that student, comparing them across the country, but also seeing what is the growth.
Exactly.
And not just as a whole classroom, but then it also allows the teachers to pivot. It also allows the teachers to dig in a little bit more and personalize that for where those students need that additional assistance in.
Exactly. And so what it allows us to do is it allows us to give parents and students clarity into if their student is ahead of grade level, are they continuing to accelerate? If they're behind grade level, how much ground are they making up each year? And at what point are they projected to be back on grade level? And that's the most important thing, because if you can get a kid back on grade level either by 3rd grade or by 8th grade, you change the trajectory of that kid's life. If a kid comes to primer and they're a grade level behind in 1st grade and we can catch them up by 3rd grade, that kid's life is changed forever. And the thing that I'm most excited about is that this year, for the first time, we have enough data to look at MAP growth as it's correlated with household income. And it sounds funny to care about, but this is probably the single most important thing to me is this year we were able to prove that at primer there is no correlation between MAP growth and household income.
I believe that.
The wealthy families that attend primer and the poor families that attend primer, you could not predict MAP growth just based on income. Every student has just as good of a shot of growing just as quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that is, if there's one metric that I care about, it's about maximizing MAP growth and keeping it uncorrelated with household income.
I love
so that the kids that come and they want to work hard, it doesn't matter if you're a family that's, on food stamps, that's really struggling to get by. If you come there and you're ready to work hard, you have just as good a shot at getting ahead as a family that maybe has tons of resources that they're going to pour into their kids. And I think what I hope is that is the promise of Primer, is that we can deliver these great academic outcomes for kids, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their family circumstances, and that we can be the place that every family who wants that kind of outcome for their kids can come to.
Yeah, I love that. I've always believed that. I would love to see your data on that so I could talk about it more and kind of tout that thing, because, a lot of times, especially in urban communities, there's always this sort of halo that's hanging over that, they're from low income families or from rural areas and they're not able to. That has absolutely nothing to do with the ability to learn. I mean, sure, but you also have the other side, though, is like once you're able to meet those, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if the kid comes to school hungry or doesn't have on a proper coat, depending on the weather, if once we address those things, then what can I put in between those ears, right? And Dr. Howard Fuller says all the time, if you give me a kid for 8 hours a day, I'm going to teach that kid how to read. Like, there's no way I can have a kid 8 hours a day and not be able to teach them how to read. So I want to ask you a little bit about, what if you all receive students, because it's enrollment, any parent can decide to enroll their child. So what about students who may be special needs or who have from a traditional system coming with IEPs? I know IEPs are probably not recognized maybe in a private sector, but how do you address those students who may have different learning needs?
Yeah, so we have tons of students that have IEPs and 504s. And we have a pretty robust admissions process where we have a dedicated team that works with those parents to understand the student, understand their needs. And we're very transparent with the parents about the services that we offer, whether we think their child will thrive at Primer or not. And so we typically, it's a conversation with the parent, a conversation with the student, figuring out if it's a good fit, if they're a good fit for Primer and we're a good fit for them. And what I care about ultimately is we want to make sure that there's lots of private schools, and I think it happens in public and charter schools too, that oftentimes, they'll accept kids and they'll kind of promise the world to these families, and then they can't actually deliver on it. And maybe they just want the increased funding or whatever they're kind of looking for. But that's actually really bad for the student. It's not good for the student. It's much better if you're honest about what you can. It's much better if you're just honest about what you can provide and what you can't. So obviously there's some students that we can't serve that need very, specific accommodations that would be better in a much larger school because we're a micro school with limited staff. But what I will say is that I was actually just talking to a mom a couple weeks ago at one of our campuses in South Florida, and she said, "Look, my daughter, she's in 6th grade. She had this super long IEP or 504s, all sorts of different things that kind of diagnoses and accommodations and medications that she was on, and she was going to a 1,400 student school, and she got to Primer and." She said it's like she's a new person. Like she doesn't need to be on medication anymore. Doctors took her off medication. She's happy, healthy. She loves school. And so I actually think that a lot of these situations, obviously, getting into a smaller environment is not a panacea. It's going to solve every issue. But I do think that there are, for certain children, the environment of being in these massive schools, with everything that comes along with that, can exacerbate a lot of just the normal challenges of growing up, but then also special, accommodations and things that they need in that environment, that when you get into a smaller environment, it's actually much easier for them to thrive. So certainly that's not every kid. Certainly there's very legitimate accommodations that you need, but we've seen story after story like that of parents that had a lot of accommodations their child needed in the traditional school environment, get into a smaller school, and all of a sudden it feels like it's much easier for them to thrive.
Sure. I again, you're speaking, I'm listening, my heart is just like, yep. And that's why I personally support choice, and that's why this organization is one of choice, because every single child learns differently, and based on that academic environment that he or she is in, it's going to cause their child to thrive or not. And so, and again, it can depend on what grade level they're in and where they are in life. And so I think we have choice in everything else. And so we should have choice in that. I wanted to ask you about, so on average, how many students would be if Primer new school opened up today and 3 grade levels or 3 classroom teachers with varying grade levels, what's the maximum that you all would allow in the classroom before you grow into, let me start this as a separate classroom?
Typically, it depends on the grade level and depends on the staffing model, but typically it's between 20 and 25 students.
Okay.
Sometimes it gets larger than that. We have certain classrooms that have 2 leaders in it. So you'll have a primary leader and you'll have a studio guide.
Okay.
So that often like K through 2, you'll have kind of multiple primary leaders. So you'll stay at like a 12-to-1, 14-to-1 student teacher ratio. But it depends on the grade level and the class size.
Okay. So I'm an educator and I'm thinking about a micro school. And I start having conversations with Primer, and then you decide to hire me. But before you hire me, you're going to assess, you're going to assess my education, or what are we assessing before we allow teachers to become a teacher in Primer?
So the most basic level is we make sure that you can hit all of the Alabama standards for teaching. So we make sure that the schools all of our schools obviously adhere to the state standards. And so there's certain teacher qualifications that are required.
Love that. Y'all heard that. The Alabama state standards. So just not some random person off the street that's going to be teaching in Primer. I had to turn to the camera for that. Okay, I'm back.
There you go. And then what we're looking for is, so there's an interview process for the fellowship. And then as the fellowship continues, you sort of earn the right to launch the school throughout the fellowship. So it's not guaranteed as you start the fellowship. The fellowship's also paid. So we pay you to participate in the fellowship.
Okay.
It's almost like an evening MBA that you get paid to participate in.
Okay.
But what we're looking for is really 3 things. So one is exceptional teaching ability. So we'll do references on parents and students that you've taught, ask them about your experience. We'll have teaching videos, evaluating you as a teacher, relatively straightforward. The second is evaluating operationally. So you need to be excellent at the kind of operations of running a small school. Those are things like parents' communications, making sure you're on top of logistics. Most teachers are actually pretty good at that, but we screen for that. The hardest one actually is we're looking for teachers who really think outside the box for the pursuits in the afternoon. And so I do a lot of final interviews with teachers, and I'll give them a scenario and I'll say, okay, assume you have a 5th grade girl. She wants to be an NFL statistician. She wants to work for an NFL team and be on their stats team. And she wants to work on, what the draft strategy should look like based on the current roster, based on who's available, based on projections of when salary contracts are going to be up, all these things. She has, 6 months to work on a pursuit related to this, 2 hours a day. How would you structure that? 95% of teachers would say, well, I'd get a trifold board. She'd do some research. She'd write a paper. Then she'd, put together her trifold board and she'd present to some parents on like a show and tell night or something, and tell us about her plan. And 5% of teachers would say, I'm going to call up the Atlanta Falcons and I'm going to say, I've got a girl. She's incredible. I want her to have a 1-week virtual internship with you. She's going to spend 6 months working on a plan for the draft based on statistical models that she's going to come up with. Can she present this to some people on your team and get real feedback from it?
Yeah.
And 5% of teachers would think to go do that and think to set that up. But if you set that up, I promise you're going to change that girl's life.
Yeah.
She's going to feel totally differently about what her dreams, what she's excited about. And we want teachers that think like that.
Yeah.
And that's what we aspire these pursuits to be, is that exciting, that engaging for kids. And so that's actually the hardest thing to find. Not because I think teachers don't think that way, but because the traditional system often keeps people so in the box that it's hard for them to build those habits. So that's what we look for as the most important piece. And then if you hit those and you make it through the fellowship, you're off to the races.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I know time is crunching down. I got 2 questions. One, really quick. So how can parents afford, how do they enroll their child in a Primer school?
Yeah, so we have to date, we've never turned away a family for their ability to pay, ever, in the history of Primer. So we have the Primer Foundation, which has scholarships available for families that need them. Then we partner with different state scholarships that are available that are often cover some or all of tuition. And then we also have our own financial aid as well. So we have parents that attend Primer for either 0 or very, very low out of pocket. And then we also have, very wealthy families that pay, full tuition. But if you're considering attending, know that we've never turned a family away for their ability to pay.
All right. Listen, Ryan Delk, anything you want to say last? That's the last question I have. Anything you want to say?
If you're interested in starting a Primer, I would love to meet you. You can go to primer.com or email me, r@primer.com. And if you're a family that's interested, we have Primers this year in Huntsville, Montgomery, and Birmingham. And then next year we'll be expanding across Alabama.
Thank you, Ryan, so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Guys, Neonta with the Advocates Chair. Really happy about this episode. Thanks for tuning in. All I want to say is cheers to the chair.